Alright, so the application starts up like this, and it uses one of these drop down buttons, and it asks you to select if you're a wheelchair user or not. So we're going to start off with selecting no, and below it is the admin password field, which a user may or may not have. But if they do have it, they can enter in the passcode, which in this case is Chad, CHAD, all lowercase. If you click enter, it says your password is correct, and it brings up some more menu options for the GUI. Um, so what these options do is they allow you to change which buildings uh, and stuff are visible to the user to navigate to. So if we go over here to the map, which since I'm the GUI guy, is done using a web view object from the JavaFX library. And um, anyway, if we go over to start and end drop down arrows, we have these four options: Nye Center, Math and Computer Science Building, Thatcher Hall, and Liberal Arts. So if I click on any one of these, Liberal Arts to the Nye Center, it'll pull up a route. And then if I click on a different route, say Math and Computer Science Building, it'll pull up another different route. It didn't change much, but or if I go to like the Thatcher Hall, brings up this route here. If I go to the Math and Computer Science Building from Thatcher Hall, it brings up that route. So notice that it has these four buildings. Now, it also brings up the directions here. This is also part of the web view um, thing that actually gets interfaces to um, a website. So this has HTML and PHP, I believe, code included in it that interfaces to the website that gets this and displays it in this web view object that allows it to be displayed on the standalone application. Um, so anyway, if you go over here to the admin controls, you have this list of buildings. These are all the buildings that are used here. And if you click remove, then it'll load for a second. And then after it's finished loading, it'll reset. And now the menu options have changed, and you can only select from these two buildings that are right here in this list. So I can go from the Liberal Arts to the Thatcher Hall, and there's the route. Now, if I go back here, and if I click, let's just add one back. So if I add the Nye Center back, click Add, then it should update this list. Yep. So all that's updated. Um, Now, if I click all of these, click Remove, it's loading. Then you have no options. And then you can add them all back. It's just loading again. It's got to connect to the website. All right. So now you can see we have all these options back. And if I click hide the admin panel, it will remove all the stuff that requires administrator um, access for. Now, the way that I did the GUI is I used a grid panel, and the grid panel is divided into two columns. So Since this is part of the website, it kind of leaves a blank spot right there. But um, uh, there are actually only two vertical panels here. There's this part for um, uh, the website display, and then this part over here for all of the user input functionality, like wheelchair and admin password, stuff like that. So um, yeah, I used a grid layout, and I set the row and column heights. I set the row height to be to take up 100% of the screen height, and I set the column height to be all of it except for um, this width right here, which is 250 pixels, and that accommodates for the largest object that'll be displayed over on this side of the screen. So it should, you know, no matter what size you open the screen at, it should um, fit that size based on the screen width from the start of the application. Um, Now I also used V boxes here. So if we go back, I used there's one V box that divides it into a bunch of vertical sections. So right here, between every object, there's a uh, a new column basically, or a new row. I mean, in the column. And I from there I also divided it into further columns that are basically invisible, but they included like these two objects, the objects that have selection and its corresponding button interface, or sorry, they're both in a VBox together, and same with these two objects. So the add button and the box there have its own VBox, and the password field has its own VBox. And then these two don't have their own VBox, but are included in this whole VBox that is this column. Um, so finally, the last uh, GUI functionality. Oh, that's also kind of cool is that you can change it from satellite view to map view, um, and vice versa if you want. They also added pins to the application, so you can click on a pin and stuff. So that's kind of a cool little extra feature. Um, so anyway, you can go back to map, terrain 2, I guess. Um, oh, so then you go back and you click on wheelchair user. Now we're going to select yes. And actually, I think the best way to demonstrate this is probably to have two windows up. So this one will remain no for the wheelchair user. And then this one's the yes one. Okay. So if I want to navigate from the Math and Computer Science building to the Liberal Arts building, that's the route that will be taken. And then if I look on this one and I go from the Math and Computer Science building to the Liberal Arts building, now we see that you can see that how the route changed. Well, actually, coincidentally, that was the one route that wouldn't change. Um, so let's go to uh, Thatcher Hall to Liberal Arts building. Okay, so that's for the wheelchair user, and this is for the non-wheelchair user. So that's the route for him. So, so notice, like right here, you end up taking a left and then you take a right, and take another right. Um, Whereas the wheelchair user, you have to go around this way. It has to avoid stairs and stuff like that. But the we hard coded the routes to go to um, handicaps accessible doors if wheelchair user is selected. So the coordinates go only to the doors that are accessible um, to wheelchair users. So that sums up the GUI functionality for the most part. One of the design patterns that we used was in the display, and it was it was a facade. Uh, so it's facade class. Yeah, it lets the dev debug through print statements, and it does it, using the console interface. So, uh, you know, these are the constructors for the concrete objects that we used, and each of these have are three there are three different functions that are called, interface to the print function. Um, so yeah, and here it is on the console, and I can reload the application, and it will show the waypoint data from that. So here we go. It's right up there at the startup, and yeah, that should be all that there is.
Alright, this is the API section of the project video. Let's get started. So with the Maps JavaScript API, this was what allows us to view the map on screen when the user selects whether or not they're in a wheelchair. It is, from what you can see here, it's saved as a variable, but then once that's called through a listener, then the map is displayed. And then, of course, with JavaScript, we can also create a constant and then do things with the map of whatever we want. For example, we have it zoomed in relatively well so that we can see the majority of the campus, at least the buildings that the app shows. And it's centered pretty much in the dab middle of the campus. Next, as of 5/1/2021, Maps has had 1,060 requests with a median latency of 21 milliseconds and a top 95% latency of 47 milliseconds. Next, we have Directions API. Now, we use this API to show the route on screen that the user, where the user selects the buildings from. Then it also displays a sequential set of directions that the user can use to get to their destination. Now, by sending files to and from the server, we can also that's how we control data in regards to building lists and navigation. And as of 5/1/2021, the Directions have had 362 requests with a median latency of 76 milliseconds and a top 95% latency of about 500 milliseconds. Now, the reason why this number is so big is because we were testing around with VPNs in regards to connecting to the server through the app. And that was the result whenever we couldn't SSH into the server because we had a VPN on. Next here is the building list. So pretty much all we do for getting the buildings is we read the data from a file stored inside of array, and then we echo the HTML code around to where it'll be read. It'll pretty much just be read from top to down as HTML, and then we do that for both drop-down menus. And as far as the mode transportation, how we get that is we use a AJAX call for jQuery get, and then through the success function we're able to parse the mode of transportation as a string from a JSON object, which you'll see in just a second. And the only problem with this is that it's pretty much restricted to be inside the success function from the AJAX call, but I mean, that's fine. We can just call the directions API from there. And then next here is the data. So as stated earlier, through an echo, we're able to call, not call, but we're able to have it act as if it was HTML code in the file itself. And here's the data that it reads. This just patches in perfectly. With here is the coordinate from the start point, and then here's the title. And then that's for both lists, for handicap and non-handicap. Now, as far as the mode of transportation, after the AJAX call and then we read it, this is the literal that the AJAX reads, or the jQuery, sorry, reads, and then we just parse it. Oh, and the reason why we want to be able to distinguish between the modes, we have bicycling and walking. We want to distinguish that because no matter what, with the directions API, if it's set to bicycling mode, no matter what, it'll take sidewalks. And that's great for a user who has a wheelchair. However, if we're doing walking, as you saw previously, the route is typically much shorter, and it allows the use of staircases and curbs and streets. And so that's how we want to guarantee for a fact that the user, if they're using a wheelchair, will be safely navigated. All right, and then another note is that these coordinates here, these are custom coordinates that we scouted out. We looked at all the doors on the buildings that are inside of our lists, and we're able to we found which doors are handicap and non-handicap accessible, and then we made two lists. This is just a single list of doors, I believe, that are handicap accessible. All right, now for the Places API, although it's not a mandatory requirement of the assignment, it is quite nice to have. It allows the user to be able to tap on just an arbitrary pin on the screen, and then from that they're able to see useful information like addresses, like the address and the name. And as of 5/1/2021, Places have had 174 requests with a median latency of 42 milliseconds and a top 95% latency of 78 milliseconds. So we did use Roads API at first. It was great. We were able to use the interpolation with breadcrumbs, with their breadcrumb system that they estimate where the road would be. That's great with Snap to Road. The only big problem with that is that we would have to handcraft the road, the routes, and that got quite tedious. It was time consuming, and Directions API just did it all for us. All we have to do is just designate the start and end point. But with Roads API, we pretty much had to we had to create the entire route by hand, and that was bad. As of the final build, it's completely removed from the final build of the project. As of 5/1/2021, Roads had 320 requests with a median latency of 5 milliseconds and a top 95% latency of 29 milliseconds. More than likely, the reason why that was so low is, I think, because of the spatial locality of the HTML file we were using originally. The reason why we needed a server is because so that we can run PHP and we could patchwork those building lists in. But with Roads API, we didn't really necessarily have to do that. We would just pass the entire route itself, and I think that's why the median latency is so low, is because we didn't really have to have it on the server. It's not being sent. And then we also had errors part of the time. That was mainly from testing how we could pass the route as a parameter, but it did count as error. So Roads API did have errors 50% of the time.
So this is my presentation, a little bit of a presentation on the history of the user libraries. First, we've got JavaFX, What we're using it for is to connect to a SSH server for the navigational program. Next, we get more on JavaFX. We've got JavaFX is considered to be the brainchild of Chris Oliver. It's quoted as intended to be a geographical interface for the user to use. Oracle completed the acquisition of the company that used it, that has it, in January of 2010. Next, we're on to JSON Simple. Was discovered by Douglas Crockford. He discovered the format for it in 2001. Originally thought to be an extension of JavaScript, it consists mostly of commas, curly braces, square brackets, and data, making it easy to parse into an array of or an object by any programming language. Next, we've got JSCH. It's a pure implementation of SSH2. Allows you to connect to a SSH server and use port forwarding, X11 forwarding, file transfer, and other methods. And it was licensed as under the BSD style license. Next, we have beans for Boolean. Boolean gets reads from a file and assigns it a buffer, appends any lines that need to be corrected, and uses a toString to make them usable string values. List view, we add and remove buildings from the list. If the building is removed, it gets put to a box below it gets added to a list below the box, and if we add it back, then it gets put back into the box. Event handler, which building goes where, handles a file, read and write to the file, and close it if it runs out of lines. Handled if the building is on the HON or non-kill list to be used in the server. Catches exceptions thrown at the server. That is my presentation.
All right, let's go ahead and go over some other things, other highlights in this project. So we also did a couple design patterns. We did the facade pattern, we did the transfer pattern, and then we also did the composite pattern. And then I can go into those in each detail. All right, excuse me. All right, so for the facade pattern, our facade class is actually display, and then our concrete classes are waypoint, waypoints, and user. And then those are all being interfaced through print, which is our interface. And so as you can see, pretty much whenever it's called, these are being called through their own respective print methods that are being interfaced from the display, or that are being called from the display object. And they're just printing out their own little thing to show, to help us really debug. And so here's an example here. Here's an example here. Somewhere. And then here is an example here. All right, going next one. Oh, and here's an example here. All right, next one. We're using the transfer object pattern. So with this pattern, we're pretty much transferring physical files, and so our data transfer objects are going to be the physical files. They're not represented in the system, but they would then be transferred using transfer, and then we would be calling a user object and transferring them using the methods and functions, or the functions through user. And it just works well with this type of thing. Next, with our composite pattern. So with our composite pattern, our component is waypoints, the waypoints class, plural. And our composite is just a single waypoint. And all the waypoint is just a string and a coordinate. And then our leaf, it would be just that single coordinate, which is just a latitude, longitude object. Other things. All right. So the benefits of using a server. So the real reason, like, that we really wanted to use a server is so that we could pretty much have this up and we can edit it real time, and then it would stay edited. Let's run, and then let's show what I was talking about. All right. So the reason why this is great for a server is that we can go ahead and we can kill buildings, right, from the Java platform. And then once they're killed from this, we can still navigate. But the cool thing is that because this is displaying a web page, as Ruben mentioned in his video, we can go ahead and go to that web page. And as you can see, the changes are still here. The changes are here. We cannot select whether or not the user is in a wheelchair. That is dependent on what the previous user has selected, but these choices are still here. And then let's go on to the next thing. Other stuff. All right, and that pretty much leads into how it's cross-platform. The user can either go to the website, or if they don't have Java runtime environment, or they can just use the web page independently. And it even works on mobile. The web page does in fact work on a cell phone. And just piggybacking off one of Blake's things in one of his video is we're parsing booleans. This is cool. How we're pretty much writing. I mean, we're needing a boolean value that's stuck inside of an event handler. And if you have to change anything inside of an event handler, you pretty much can't. It has to be final or a constant, right? And so how we get around this is we write to a file true or false, right? And then whenever we need to read that value, we then just call read bool, and then it here it's read bool here, and it gets it. It reads the text file. Gets it as a string, and then here we parse it, and then we return that as a boolean, and then that's how we see whether or not which list we're using. Yeah, that's just a little bit extra thing I wanted to add. Alrighty, that was this. In order to give you guys an example, let's go ahead and turn off my VPN. Let's go ahead and go back to NetBeans.
And the way that we actually implemented this is interesting. But we basically just used the... there are two modes that you could set the API to. And one of them was walking. So that'll include routes like stairs and stuff. And then the other one was for biking. So we use the bike routes for the wheelchair users since they both have wheels, right? So
all right, APIs we killed.
And we also just since we had to add the buildings ourselves and the coordinates for them, they also had sorry, I forgot what I was going to say.
Is 599 milliseconds.
So this one accepts an object of type waypoints, and this one accepts an object of type waypoint. They're not the same thing actually. And then this is user down here.